In this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling the life and crimes of Melvin Rees, a serial killer who is intelligent and articulate. I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, we know that these killers have unusual behaviors, but this one was unusual because he was intelligent, philosophical, a talented musician, and he left a death diary for all to read. Brandy, highly intelligent serial killer?
Oh, John, he won't be the first and not the last. We know that a lot of these serial killers are able to pull the wool over people's eyes because of their talents, because they might be business owners. But very interested to learn about this guy and his death diary.
Yeah, very, a lot of them keep notes, detailed notes. He actually wrote in his diary about his philosophy of life and how killing was a part of that philosophy. Well, Brandy, let's get into Melvin Rees, the sex beast.
Melvin Rees, the sex beast. Okay, so John, we know Melvin was born in 1928, died in 1995. Like you mentioned, a talented musician, a jazz saxophonist, actually, and a pianist. But Melvin is accused, and we know he murdered 5 people, but possibly 9 plus. So we don't actually know if it's 5, possibly more. And this is in the Maryland, Virginia area between 1957 and 1959. We know he's eventually sentenced to death. It was commuted to life in prison, and he died in prison. But like you said, intelligent, philosophical, and left literally a death diary.
Yeah, very, very different from many of the serial killers that we've covered. So we're going to kind of dive into his life here and see if he profiles like many of the other killers. And I'm just betting he is going to. He was born in Maryland in 1920, as you said. And he was a gifted musician. Matter of fact, all reports from other musicians that played with him, band members, people that knew him, said he was very, very talented and played a number of different jazz clubs. He came from a stable family environment. He was the younger of 2 children, and he was outward and articulate. So far, it's not tracking with your normal serial killer. Now, he did admit later on that he had a history of voyeurism and sexual deviance, and that deviance, those fantasies, started to escalate. But there's no known offenses prior to the murders that we know of. He did work odd jobs, growing up in Maryland around the D.C. area, but played in a number of jazz bands. But strangely, each one of them were pretty short-lived. And I think now we're starting to see a little bit of his personality, because apparently everybody talked about how talented he was, but he wasn't able to kind of stay with the band. He
Yeah.
wasn't able to have that stable lifestyle. So as we kind of look at profiling, we already start to see a couple of things. He did attend a military style school, graduated from high school, and served in the Army as, guess what? A musician.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
So he did his military stint, but he did it as a musician. He returned and went to college at the University of Maryland, like many of our veterans did, but then dropped out to be a musician. And I gotta think, or I gotta wonder, did he drop out because he couldn't stay with it? Or did he seriously say, college isn't for me, I want to be a musician? It could be either or, but as we know, for many young adults, college is simply making it through, right?
Right.
Being able to show an employer you were somewhere on time, you did the work,
Yep.
and everything that was required for 4 years. So I'm putting a little check mark by that because I'm not not really sure. But we do know that he did pursue his jazz career.
Mhm.
He was married in 1954 and had one son, but divorced in 59. And we know he was kind of in and out of other
Mhm.
relationships. So, that's a little bit on what we're gleaning from his background, but
Yeah.
his later on admitting to the sexual fantasies,
Mhm.
escalating,
Yeah.
and then his inability, right, to stick with something
Yeah, commitment.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, commitment is certainly a red flag. But, unlike many of the killers we've seen, Brandy, he
Mhm.
came from a good,
Yes.
stable family environment.
Well, if I'm correct, so did Ted Bundy. So, there's a lot of serial killers that we know that are raised in good families, but it is these red flags you talk about. I see kind of lack of commitment. I mean, I know lots of musicians, and typically when they find a band, they stick, right? It's very unusual to move around. Now, when you're a little bit younger, like he was, I can see maybe trying to figure out what kind of people he wants to play with. I know that can be important, but I also see the dropping out. Did he just not want to put in the work? Did he think he didn't need college to be a musician? That's kind of what else I kind of thought about too. But I'm seeing a very low lack of commitment. And not only that, John, but the voyeurism and the things he admitted. I also wonder, were those things he kept to himself for a very long time? And then he started executing those things in a different way, which is murder. So I
Or
am kind
maybe
of curious.
they came out in his marriage, which was pretty short
Yes.
lived.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up Ted Bundy because there's another intelligent, articulate, charming serial killer. So I'm
Yes.
wondering, is there a pattern here that if you come from a stable environment and a good family and a good upbringing, but you're wired wrong, right?
That's right.
Then this is the type of killer you turn into, as opposed to other killers that have had horrific upbringings, uh,
Mhm.
and terrible abusive families. I don't know, just something to throw out there.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Okay, we know that the early crime, John, started in 1955. He was actually arrested for attempting to forcefully drag a 36-year-old woman into his car. So, attempted abduction, 1955. Now, however, the woman ended up not pressing charges and the case against Reese was dropped. We talk about this all the time, these early misses. If she would have pressed the charges, if he had spent any time in jail, um, after leading up to what his next crime is, but already showing attempts to abduct women.
And you've got to look at this is 1 year into his marriage.
Yeah. Oh, good point.
Especially
Yes.
back then, I guarantee she knew about it. Somebody
Yeah.
had to bail him out of jail. I mean, that's a
So
pretty
true.
serious charge. And so they're 1 year into a marriage. They did have a son. I'm not sure what year that was, but did she stay to take care of the baby or to
Mhm.
have the baby? Or, it was a short-lived marriage, but you can see why. Whereas 1 year into it, he's arrested for abducting a woman.
Um, but another thing we talk about with profiling, John, you point out is what you talked about the wiring and the psychological characteristics of him. So anything that you're kind of picking up out of the beginning. I mean, we know he had an obsession with philosophy. He kept this death diary. He was very charming. Um, it also says he was very lack of empathy, which is a big one, I think. We can
Yep.
talk about that. But what else are you kind of picking up here?
Well, in his philosophy, he really believed in an existential philosophy, which is a philosophy of basically experimenting and experience. And he said to multiple people, and this is going to come back to bite him, that he viewed murder as just a part of the human experience. All right, now we're starting to see
Interesting.
how some of the wires are crossed here. I
Hmm.
don't think most normal people view murder. I'm not talking about death, right?
Right,
That
right.
death is a part of life, but he specifically said he viewed murder as part of the human experience. And he also said murder proved personal superiority. So right there, we're starting to see, hey, some things are a little bit off. One of the other things that I discovered is that he was a heavy Benzedrine user. And if you remember, you don't, you're too young, but you might have heard that bennies, as they were popularly referred to, were amphetamines.
Yep.
That they used, and the height of the popularity was from the 1930s to the 1960s, and it was part of that hippie cult kind of generation. He was a heavy user of bennies, and something else that I looked when I looked into exactly their background and why it dropped off. They didn't really drop off. They really became mainstream after that, because today a lot of this same drug is known as Adderall. And we know many, many people that are on Adderall.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. I know there's been several people that I have come in contact with through podcasting and different things that Adderall can actually be very highly addictive, even if you're prescribed Adderall. And,
Right.
and people actually take it in different ways, which I was surprised to see. I don't know. I think of like 1930s, 1960s, they were probably just pills. But it's actually, people actually snort Adderall now. And so it can be very helpful and effective for people who really need it. I think it's mainly like an ADHD maybe prescription. I don't know.
Right. I think it keeps
Heavy
them
things
more
about it.
focused.
Yeah, more focused.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're abusing it and using
Yep.
it like you're not supposed to, what is then doing to the brain that is already dealing with some wiring issues here? So that is very interesting that he was taking this.
And he would take it, Brandy, and then go off on these philosophical discussions with his friends. And like I said, we're going to learn more about that later and how it comes back to bite him. But now we're starting to see more of that profile come together, right?
Yeah.
He came from a good, stable background, good parents and everything, but he was a substance abuser.
Yes. Yes.
And fairly significant. We don't know about any diagnosed mental health issues or brain injury. We do know that he more fit the profile of that handsome, charming, intelligent, articulate type serial killer. Certainly a very good musician. I would expect a average or above average IQ. He wasn't a loner. He wasn't, I think the only thing that might lead to what you said is lack of commitment, not being able to stay with the band when the band wanted him to stay there. But then he did talk about later on his fascination with voyeurism and how his fantasies continued to escalate. And as far as criminal history, even though the charges were dropped, he did try to abduct that woman. So sometimes if you don't dig deep enough, right? And that's what the job of us in law enforcement is. It's to uncover these facts. It's to do a deep dive, to dig down and say, it'd be easy enough to go, wow, the parents were nice, stable upbringing, can't be this guy. But once you start peeling back the layers, kind of like an onion, right? And then you're going to really discover what's underneath. And I think we've seen that he's starting to check many of these boxes.
Well, the killing years with this guy, like we said, possibly 9+ murders. This isn't a 3-year period, 1956 to 1959. We haven't really talked about the demographics, but we know that the setting he really liked was the rural highways and wooded areas between Annapolis, Maryland, and Fredericksburg, Virginia. So he drove a green Chrysler. He reused an abandoned center block building as basically his lair. They found some pornographic images, autopsy photos on the wall. So this guy was sort of creating this environment, not only in executing these murders, but then building a lair and looking at it. And did he bring women there? Do we know yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we know he brought women there, but I find it interesting I spent over 3 decades in DC, and a lot of time I know exactly where Annapolis, Maryland is, where Fredericksburg, Virginia is. And to me, it's interesting. We know he played jazz clubs in Washington, so you can kind of put a pin in the map in Washington and draw a circle with, Maryland up to the north, Virginia down to the south, and kind of really hone in on his geographic comfort zone. And he stayed within that geographic comfort zone and even had that lair in that geographic comfort zone. So I find that really, really interesting. When we go back to geographic profiling, which is not, one of the most popular, highly used, a lot of profilers jump right to characteristics, jump right to victimology. But as you know, with the serial killer I captured, I used geographic profiling, albeit 20 years before it had a name, but I used it. And I think it's very important to learn a killer's comfort zone. And like when we did the show on Jack the Ripper, which I don't think we've done a podcast on it, but I've done a live show on it. It really fascinated me, the small area that he lived and worked in. So geographic profiling was even important in 1888. They just didn't know it. But let's get back to Melvin Rees here. And he would force cars over at gunpoint. We know he carried a .38 revolver, that he would abduct all or some of the victims, that he would sexually assault some of the victims, and that he was into necrophilia. And the reason that we know this, and that we know that his killings were experimental and observational, kind of makes me think of the toy box killer, which we did cover, right? He kept experimenting to see how much pain the women could take. He kept experimenting on his victims. Melvin Rees is doing the same thing. It's his philosophical experimentation. And again, we know this because he's very, very explicit in the death diary that he kept, those handwritten notes that he kept on each and every victim.
Wow. John, I do find it very interesting that we just talked about this guy's childhood growing up and his background and everything. And now we're talking about just his, like you say, don't get in their heads, Brandy. I'm not, but it's very fascinating, that shift, that wiring, like you said, that can really just make someone think that murder is a part of life. Right? Like even just that statement, they clearly view society and the world very differently than you or I do. So I do find it very fascinating.
Isn't it crazy that it's just one word, but it makes all the difference in the world? It's not death is a part of life.
Right.
It's murder is a part of life. So do you see how the wiring can be off by the smallest amount and make it a totally different situation and turn him into somebody who's instead just a philosopher to a homicidal maniac?
Well, he starts on June 26, 1957 with Margaret Harold in Annapolis, Maryland. So Harold and U.S. Army Sergeant Roy D. Hudson, they were basically just out driving. So she and a U.S. Sergeant was driving around. So Rees is in his green Chrysler. He forces their car off the road, which, as we already said, he's done multiple times now. Now he demands cigarettes and money at gunpoint with a nickel-plated .38 revolver. They refuse to give him anything, and when they do, he shoots Harold point blank in the face. So the boyfriend flees across fields to call the police. Reese returns, removes her clothing, sexually assaults her, sexually assaults the body, actually. So this is which I find
Yeah,
so
because he
interesting,
shot
John.
her in the face.
Yes, and the necrophilia, I mean, if this is his first victim, I mean, out of the gate, I mean, I typically don't see this. I see this sometimes forming in a serial killer.
Right.
Maybe
Evolving.
their first victim, they don't jump straight to necrophilia, but eventually that sexual desire and that sexual drive, which makes it a sexual crime, starts to kick in. So but yeah, so right out of the gate, he's, assaulting the body after she has been shot in the face, John.
Well, the big red flag for me, and we've covered many of these cases, including married murderers and others. And the big red flag for me here is, why didn't he kill the army sergeant? Where is the threat? When you're attacking a couple, a man and a woman, where is the normal threat to you as a killer?
Yeah, you are so right.
Not the
male.
woman.
That's right.
Right? Why didn't he immediately shoot him in the face and then attack the woman and do whatever he wants? But this is total. What did he want out of this, Brandy?
He wanted to have sex with a dead body, is what I think.
That's exactly right. That's what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
He let the army sergeant run away.
Yeah,
he
after seeing him too. I think of that eyewitness. That's the best thing you can have is an eyewitness.
And that will come back. And we're going to see Sergeant Hudson have a significant role in this case, unfortunately, much later on after there's more victims. But that is... when we're profiling the cases here and people start going, oh, they're really getting into the MO of him having a gun and running them off the road. No, the big thing here is he did not take out the threat. He let the threat and the witness leave. He shot the woman in the face so he could have sex with her dead body.
Okay, let's talk about the lair a little bit. By the way, which was unknown to police. It was a nearly abandoned center block building that contained violent porn, autopsy photos, and a broken window that was used for entry. So there were tire marks and red button evidence later linked to future scenes from this lair. What do we know about this lair, John? Did he spend a lot of time there?
We do know, we think he spent significant time there. We do know that he brought at least some victims there because the red button was off the dress of one of his future victims that we're going to talk about. So we know he was there. There's tire marks. There's a lot of physical evidence inside. Remember, he talked about having fantasies and porn and things like that when he was younger. Well, now he has a place to go and to live out those fantasies and bring victims to. So this is a very, very intelligent and organized killer. He knows exactly what he wants to do and where he wants to bring the bodies, which is to his lair, which was in a secreted area. The police don't find it for quite a bit later, but there's a tremendous amount of evidence in there.
Well, another thing, John, that you profiling is victimology, right? So we've got our first victim, but now we're jumping to an entire family. The Jackson family disappears January 11th, 1959, driving home from a family party. The vehicle had all 4 family members in it. They were reported missing. Police start to search the route between the houses, but they find nothing. Stories run in the local paper, looking for help. So what do we know about this?
I mean,
it's a jump. I mean, you have one victim, now you're going to kidnap or murder an entire family.
Yeah, it's a big deal. An entire family's missing.
Yes.
This is not like a teenage runaway, right? And we see that. This is an entire family disappearing, car and all.
Wow.
And so this became very big news in the area saying, hey, we need some help with this case because we've got no evidence. We've got no clues. We've got no leads at this point. We have 4 missing family members and a vehicle. I mean, that is tremendously rare. You start thinking too, oh my gosh, did they drive off a bridge, fall into the Chesapeake Bay, and they're totally gone?
Yeah.
But if they did, where's the bridge? Where's
right.
the accident scene? Where did they drive off into the water? Many cases I've worked, we end up finding cars in creeks or in ponds or in small lakes, but there's usually some evidence, right?
Right.
Tire tracks, skid marks, trees knocked down. You know, you never know. Did the driver, pass out and drive off the road? So
Yeah.
very, very, very big case. A lot of headlines because 4 people, a mom, a dad, and 2 children, and their vehicle are gone.
So thankfully, some critical information starts to come in. And I would call this a witness because there was a couple that came forward and they've actually informed police that they had been pulled over. A man was driving behind them, past their car. He blinded them with their headlights. They had a story. He
Right.
caused the car to veer off the road. The guy gets out of his car, approaches the couple. They sense danger, right? They need to drive away. They describe him as a dark-haired man with an odd gait. So this was actually witnessed. So he tried to probably do this to them, was unsuccessful. They were able to drive off. They go to police, thankfully, because again, like you said, this is all over everywhere. They're looking for this family. So they come with this information. But unfortunately,
And it's on the same day.
Yes, exactly.
The same day.
Great.
So what did he do? After, obviously they fled. What did he do?
He went to the police.
No. The bad guy.
Oh, the bad guy. Oh, he's going to try it again. He missed.
He's trying it again.
Yeah,
he missed, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man. He's learning. He's evolving.
Yep.
Wow. I messed up on that one, right? It didn't work out the way I wanted. The MO is the same, male, female, in the car. But when he got out, they felt something was wrong. You know, I always tell you, and I always tell my girls, if that hair stands up on the back of your head, there's a reason. And they felt it, right?
Yes.
They obviously felt it. They weren't like, oh, maybe we need to help this man. Maybe he's in trouble. Oh, he's got a weird gait. They didn't think, oh, maybe he's injured. They went with their instincts and said, let's get out of here. And it saved their lives.
Yeah. And John, I always tell people, listen, if you don't know, it's best to just go to police and let them handle it. If he needs help and he needs something, go tell the police and they will check on him. But it is really not always up to us to make sure that people, especially when you said that gut instinct kicks in, we have that for a reason. And you go let the police handle it and they will help him if he needs help. But
unfortunately,
yes,
they didn't tell anyone.
Yeah.
They just thought it was a strange incident. And then 4 months later, police find out that the family was forced off the road. This is the Jackson family again that disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
That dad, Carol, was shot, a male, the father.
Mm-hmm.
And baby Janet, 18 months, was shot.
Mm.
I can understand the dad is the threat, like we talked about.
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
But an 18-month-old baby. He then abducts Mildred, the wife and mom, and Susan, who I think was 4 years old at the time.
Oh, God.
And where's he take him, Brandy?
To the lair.
To the lair. Yeah. Take him to the lair. And that's where we found some evidence.
Mm-hmm.
He brutally tortured and raped Mildred and murdered her by beating her in the head with a cinder block.
Mm-hmm.
But he also sexually assaulted and murdered 4-year-old Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the bodies of Carol and Janet, the first two that he found, were found March 4th in a ditch near Fredericksburg, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
But Mildred and Susan, who had been taken to the lair and then their bodies moved after those horrific attacks, weren't found until March 21st, and it was near Annapolis, Maryland. So we have him evolving from a single homicide that we know of at this point to killing an entire family.
I mean, not even just killing an entire family, but shooting the father, shooting an 18-month-old baby, and then you take the mother and the daughter to your lair. I mean, I can just imagine the chaos. And I just hope as a mother, and you know, you don't like thinking about these things, John, as we cover them, how just what that scene was probably like, you know.
Right.
Um
The horror.
the horror and the fear, and I can't even imagine. And God, what a jump from his first victim. Like he is evolving. I mean, what are you picking up just him this early on making this shift?
Well, so unfortunately to me, this does make sense. That's
Okay.
because I'm messed up. I've been doing this for 4 decades. Because what was his emotion? And I go back to the serial killer I captured.
Mhm.
He missed his intended target,
Mhm.
and he flew into a rage.
Mhm.
This guy missed his intended target and was mad.
I see.
And
Okay.
he was going to get even and take out that anger and that frustration on whoever he got next. And unfortunately, it wasn't a single person or it wasn't a young couple. It was an entire family of 4. So actually, I
Mhm.
can see exactly what was going through his mind. He was angry at himself. He was mad. He probably blamed himself for letting them get away, letting there be a witness. And he was furious, and he took it out on the next car that would stop for him. And unfortunately, that was the Jackson family.
Mm. Okay, John. So we got some key evidence that eventually is discovered. There's some bodies buried in a shallow grave outside of the building, and they're found actually 4 months later. Rees wrote in his death diary, quote, "Now the mother and daughter were all mine." Red button from Midland's dress was found inside of the lair. So that's again just some key
Yeah,
evidence there, but just
it ties it together, right? It paints a picture for us that we now have physical evidence, right?
yes.
Especially the red button from Mildred's dress inside his lair. We now have physical evidence linking this horrific killer and these poor victims. Now, on each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature a wine break. But this wine break is going to be a little bit different because, as our regular listeners know, we just introduced a brand new True Crime and wine series with our friends at Wine Shop at Home. It's called The Investigation. And the wine that I want to feature today is our Perfect Alibi Pinot Grigio. This is a great option for outdoor gatherings when you're surrounded by friends, family, or maybe even witnesses. This Oregon Pinot Grigio has tropical fruit and floral characteristics such as daffodil, peach, pineapple, apricot, and apple. Perfect Alibi you may detect some minerality, which might remind you of flint or gunpowder aromas, and that's perfect for a true crime and wine brand. But also, did you know that minerality is actually a common characteristic for this varietal? So I encourage you to go online and pick up a bottle of our Pinot Grigio, our Perfect Alibi Pinot Grigio. And of course, you can order it at the link in the bio. And if I haven't mentioned it yet, for every bottle purchased, $1 is donated to the DNA Doe Project, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to helping law enforcement name unidentified remains using investigative genetic genealogy. Absolute fantastic. I met with their management recently and just learned the great things that they're doing to identify victims of crime. So, Perfect Alibi, our Pinot Grigio. The link to order it is in the bio.
Okay, John. So we've already talked about a little bit of the profiling. We brought up a little bit of the victimology and his signature. But what are you picking up with just the victims of the family that we talked about and the first victim? I see that he jumped from one person assault, murder to an entire family. I don't know if he's going to start progressing even more, but what are you picking up on the victimology?
Yeah, is he going to keep growing in numbers? I
Yeah.
don't think so. To me, that first abduction that we know about, the failed one, was a single person. He evolved to say, I think I can take out couples, meaning kill the woman and be with her and let the male go, like we saw in the other crime. I think it was a matter of rage that said, the next card that stops for me, all of them are going to die. I got to believe that. I just don't see this exponential
Mm,
victimology here,
I
right?
see.
1, 2, 4, 8. I don't see that. I see that as a rare kind of isolated incident. But certainly he wants the women and he wants to spend time with them, but unfortunately, even little girls at this point.
So the sex beast comes from the brutality. I think that's where he got the name of his brutal crimes. And then,
Yeah, because it was rape, it was beatings, it was
yes.
necrophilia, and it's all obviously sexually motivated.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we've talked about some of the victimology, let's talk about the crime scenes. So we talked about the highway ambushes. He used the weapons, brought the weapon with him, right? We've talked
Yep.
about that. Is he bringing a weapon of choice? He does. He brings the gun. He's transporting the victims, which I think also is important when you talk about the geographic comfort zone of where you are, where you're dumping them, where you're murdering them. Are you moving them? And are we thinking is little organized or disorganized, John?
Yeah, those are all organized characteristics and also the pre planning. And
Mm,
I see pre planning in the locations that he's choosing. He's choosing very small, remote, rural roads, which
mhm.
shows me that not only does he know the area, he's probably from the area, works in the area, um, but he knows to stay away from the highways and even there's tons of 2-lane roads, 4-lane roads in that area, but he's picking the smallest, most isolated. So he has a really good geographical knowledge of that area. And he knows if he can get a car going down this remote road, chances are,
Mhm.
whether he puts up his hood or gets out and plays hurt, they're going to stop because for most people, they want to help, right?
Right.
They don't do as we tell them. And as you said, keep going and tell the police,
Yep.
let the police go check on them. You don't want to get ambushed out there on this rural road. So to me, the planning, the preparation, the location of the offenses, the weapons, the transportation, and of course the lair,
Yes.
having the lair pre-prepared for him, all
Yeah.
of those are very, very organized behaviors. Now, some of the disorganized behaviors, and we see this combination, brutal overkill of the
Yeah.
bodies left fairly close to the lair. Why are you going to do that? That's your main headquarters and operating area,
Hmm.
and very minimal concealment of the bodies. And we've talked
Yeah.
about this on many different shows. He just doesn't care. Right? He
Yeah.
doesn't care if they're found. He's not taking the time to dig a deep grave, to
Yeah.
use rocks and sink them in a river or the Chesapeake Bay. There's many, many things he could do to dispose of these bodies,
Mhm.
and he's doing a very minimal effort of it.
Well, and I also wonder, leaving him near the lair, is that so he can look at his work, think about it when he walks by it?
Yeah,
I do wonder about that.
I don't think they were like immediately, near his lair. I don't think it was a situation where the tire
No.
tracks are going to take you 50 feet.
Yeah, yeah,
I think it was but it was close enough that authorities are like, why would you do this?
yeah.
Why would you leave the bodies near the lair?
Mhm,
Um, but he definitely pre-planned
mhm.
and prepared these attacks by planning where he was going to do it,
Yeah,
how he was going to get away with it, and where he was going to bring his victims to commit the murder or the
mhm.
sexual assault, but certainly the necrophilia.
Well, and we talked about the importance of, what you did before we called it a thing, right? You were able to you used the geographic profiling for the eyeball killer, and there was surrounding areas, and I think it is important. I think it's important because comfort zone and where they live, who they talk to, where that I mean, we talked on our last episode about the guy who was literally living smack dab underneath the billboard that was looking for
Right.
him, right? I mean, these things are important because how far are they willing to go? That's what I kind of look at, right? And what do they have access to? Do they have families in other states? So I think geographic profiling is just as important as anything else, in my opinion, John.
Well, with a lot of people, they're comfortable where they grew up, quite
Very
frankly.
true.
He grew up in Maryland. Certainly, that was his comfort zone. He played in D.C., and even Northern Virginia was not foreign to him. It's a very small geographic area.
Yeah.
But again, when you're profiling, I could look at a map and I could look at the entire metro subway system
Mhm.
and go, wow, I can get to Maryland. I can get to Virginia. I can get to Western Virginia,
Yeah.
but he's not utilizing transportation areas or anything like that. He's
That's right.
picking these rural, remote roads.
Yeah.
And from a profiling standpoint, that's telling me he is very familiar with this area and spends a lot of time driving these roads.
Oh, that's a good point. Good point. Okay, so let's talk about his psychology a little bit. He's a sexual sadist, psychopathic traits, complete of totally sexually assaulting, murdering a 4-year-old with her mother right there. High intelligence, we talked about that, and then fantasies really that he had documented in this diary.
Yeah, and I think that high intelligence may allow somewhat for compartmentalization.
I
How
think
he
so.
can compartmentalize murder as simply an existential, philosophical exercise.
Yes.
I'm not just going to study it. I'm not just going to read about it. I'm not just going to talk about it. I'm going to go do it. And then I'm going to keep a death diary
Hmm.
to record everything. Wow. You got to be able to really compartmentalize
Hmm.
when you're out there raping, abducting, and murdering.
Um, his characteristics. I want to talk about that for a second. So we talked about the organization versus some of the disorganization stuff. The sexual sadism plus the necrophilia was the primary source of what he was attempting to do. But and you,
Yeah,
but
that had to be.
I know
Isn't
it's
that
interesting
isn't that
though.
weird that it to me, even though he talked about murder as a part of
Yes,
life, he was really into the necrophilia. Like you said, that very first murder that we know about,
right.
he jumped right to necrophilia.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, he didn't poison the victim, right?
Right.
He shot her in the face and still
Hmm.
wanted to violate her after she was dead. I'm not sure we've covered a case like this. We've
No.
covered a lot of necrophilia, unfortunately, but not one where the guy it almost looks like it's his main goal, right?
Yeah. Well, and because he did talk a lot about the power and the control and having, and typically, right, John, that's why they're doing this, because so they can have power and control over someone. But for that to be secondary and the primary be the necrophilia is different. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just different.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure we've covered one like this.
No.
The other thing that I see is he has this pattern he's comfortable with
Hmm.
on these remote roads and in this lair. Um, it's almost like he saw him when I think of a lair. I don't know, maybe it's my age. I think of superheroes, right?
Yeah.
Batman had a lair.
Uh,
You know, when you
Yes,
hear
that's
that
right.
term, it just seems like it's connected with somebody hiding that's a
Hmm.
hero. But for him, maybe he felt, well, I'm doing these existential experiments.
Hmm.
I'm recording this, and I'm using this layer over and over again to bring
Hmm.
victims to. So, very different
Like the
than
mad scientist, kind of, in a
yeah.
weird,
And,
murderous way, right?
and
Like,
and and I go back to the toy box killer, right? He had that location he built,
yes,
$100,000. That was his lair. But
yes.
we don't generally see that in a lot of serial killers, that they have something like this.
Okay, so we did mention that there was convictions of crimes, right, that we know of, but there were also additional crimes. A couple that he actually confessed to post conviction, but that is 4 young women and teenagers that were raped and murdered in separate incidences in Maryland. So we have Mary Chamay, Ann Ryan, Mary Fellers, and Shelby Venable. Reese actually confessed to 2 of these post conviction, but authorities linked him to at least 2 more. Same MO, same region, same kind of time frame. So,
Yeah, and I think the reason we're talking about this, Brandy, is you and I know there's more bodies.
sure. Yes.
Right. He didn't go from 1 to 4 and then stop. And
Right.
these weren't discovered until later on. But during the same time period, authorities are kind of scratching their head and wondering, they've got missing persons, but again, they're one female here, one female there. And
Mhm.
they were apparently all raped and slain in separate incidents. So
Yeah.
it was after his capture, and we're going to get into that, fairly easy to tie him to these other crimes,
Mhm.
and he confessed to some of them. But I think it's important to point out that in this 2-year time period, it wasn't just the 4 he was convicted of,
That's right. Yeah.
right?
Right.
That he was out there on the prowl.
Well, and they're also going to find notes, right, about some of these and more physical evidence into maybe bodies that have never been found, or maybe they're not sure who he's speaking of in these notes. So,
Yeah,
that
and
too.
it's like with every killer,
Mhm.
in our notes we put convicted of 4, tied to 9, and we put that
Mhm.
little plus sign after it, right?
Right.
Because there could be more victims
Mhm.
that we unfortunately just haven't found yet.
Yeah.
And back then we didn't have the DNA and the testing to tie everybody together, but authorities knew that this killer had a pretty straightforward MO, that he forced vehicles off of dark, remote, deserted roads. He used a gun. He was into the sexual assault, the torture, the strangulation, the shooting, the beating. That he had a car, he had to get to these areas and get from them. That later when they discover his lair, then they also discover he was transporting the bodies there. But these are places that had easy access, low witnesses. And that unfortunately, with each of the crimes, there was extreme sadism and necrophilia. That's what this guy was
Mm.
apparently into.
So apart also some of the things that were really kind of motivating behind some of his actions. Well, one, we know he had no remorse. He
Right.
described killing as an artistic experience. Again, I think like mad scientists, like this,
Yeah.
these aren't people to him. These are experiments, and he's learning about them and writing about them and discovering like, ugh, it's
Yeah,
just,
and talking. We're going to
and
find out
talking.
later. He's on these bennies and he's having conversations with people.
Mm.
To me, I'm thinking he totally thinks there's nothing wrong with this.
Oh no, that's
Right?
100% what I think. Yes.
Right. There's
Like
nothing wrong. He's
he's
got,
like non-humanizing them, in my
yeah,
opinion.
because they're an experiment
Yep. Yeah.
and he's documenting it, right?
Right.
And you're right. They're not human to him. And he has this, you know, paraphilic thrill
Mhm.
of non-humans or non-consenting adults that we know of because he rapes them, kills them, and then has sex with them. Later on, he's going to blame, I read too many porn magazines and the old detective magazines that had women in them, and I took too many amphetamines. But no, you're writing detailed diaries and conducting experiments.
Yeah.
You know exactly what you're doing and you're documenting it. These are not wild ravings of a madman that you can't understand.
No,
He's got no
I
remorse.
see a functioning addict who
Yeah,
actually maybe almost gets more of a high and thrill of what he's doing when he is high. That's what I see. I just see someone who has completely lost their mind, possibly just taking too many drugs, but again, not a drug addict committing murder and
right.
like discarding them like trash, right? This is someone who's going and writing about it after it's done. I mean,
So, do you think Brandy's taking the drugs?
yep.
He's talking to people. He's telling them about his philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he kind of comes down from the high, he goes, well, I guess it's time to experiment again.
Yeah, because I think there's some level of satisfactions he's not receiving. I think it probably started with self-medicating. Maybe maybe the Adderall gave him a little bit, the bennies gave him a little bit of the ups, right? And he was able to, maybe that wiring was fixed a little bit, right? We talk about self-medicating all the time, but to me, there was
Right.
something missing. There was something that he wasn't getting, and maybe it was just more satisfying to do it on bennies. And then when you come down off of it, you want that high again, right? He needs that energy. Maybe that's what he got from the drugs, and he was able to actually do this. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Very, very strange.
Very strange.
But we do know that a big break in the case came when an anonymous letter was received by the police. We talked about this received a lot of media attention, especially when the Jackson family went missing. Well, the letter was from a former acquaintance, Glenn Mosier, who stated that he knew Rees and that him and Rees often engaged in philosophical discussions when they were under the influence of bennies. And that during one discussion, Rees stated to him that killing was acceptable and that he considered killing just another part of the human experience. And he even expressed an eagerness to experience it. Well, Brandy, if I want to kill somebody, not only am I not going to tell you, but I'm not going to share with you, wow, I want to have this experience, Brandy. We're going to go kill someone, right?
Yeah. And what did I think? What's the saying, John? The more people that know, the more likely you are to get caught, right? So you should keep some of this stuff to yourself. But he's clearly under the influence. He's speaking openly about this. But how many cases have we covered that they do talk about this in a roundabout way? That they want, is it that they want someone to actually know what they're doing? Or is it the drugs that's making him sort of admit this? Experience it. I think maybe at this point he has already experienced experienced it, or at least
Oh, yeah.
thoughts of experiencing it. So again, it's like talking in like future sense, but it
Yep.
really is past sense. He's already done it. So what else does he say about some of this statement that he made?
Well, Mosher also recalls him making a statement the very day before the Jacksons disappeared. And again, they're probably high, they're taking bennies, he's being philosophical, but he says you can't say it's wrong to kill. Only individual standards make it right or wrong. And so obviously his individual standards didn't make it wrong. He felt as long as it was part of an experiment, it was okay. But hey, police now finally have something to go on. They've got someone that says, I know this guy. He's talking about this. He said this right, before the Jacksons were reported missing, and the police start looking into it. They start tying things together, and he's arrested by U.S. Marshals in West Memphis, Arkansas. So he did flee his comfort zone. He fled the area. This was in June of 1960, and they arrested him not on murder. They arrested him on interstate flight to avoid prosecution. So that's one of those common things that the U.S. Marshals can arrest for. If you committed a crime somewhere and you go across state lines so that you're not found or arrested or convicted, that is a separate offense. So that was actually the offense that he was arrested for. Well, once they arrested him, it went downhill really quickly, because they found that sergeant, the Army sergeant that was with Harold. Remember him, the one that you said was a witness and got away? Well, he picked him out of a lineup. And they also recovered the .38 caliber revolver he used and the death diary. Some of the notes from the death diary were inside his saxophone case, and clipped to the notes was an article about Mildred Jackson. So you talk about tying everything together up into a neat little bow. The police have everything they need, right? They've got an eyewitness. They've got this death diary. They've got a random, again, who's else is going to have this newspaper article? This random newspaper article clipped to, your notes about Mildred. They match ballistics to his gun from the crime scene. They match tire tracks from his vehicle, because remember, he always used that green vehicle. He never switched it up, so they matched the tire prints to him that they found prints outside of the lair. And of course they had the diary with all of his writings and describing how he did it. They didn't need a confession from him. They had everything they needed, but kind of the coup de grace, if you ask me, was the linkage of the button from Mildred's dress that she was last seen in and that she was last found in. The button was back in his lair. So proof positive, he had kidnapped her from one place, took her to his lair, sexually assaulted her, killed her, and then had sex with her again. But he didn't pick up all the evidence. The button remained in the lair. I can't believe it, but I've actually got another big announcement. Recently we announced the launch of 6 new true crime and wine brands, and that has been just fantastic. But earlier this year, I took a trip to Italy, to Tuscany, with my wine club, and it was just amazing. We had wine lunches, wine dinners. We toured historic Tuscany. Absolutely wonderful. But after a lot of calls and emails from our fans who said, when are we going to do true crime and wine? in Italy. Well, I talked to our trip coordinators, and we're going to make it happen in November. Yeah, November of this year, November 26th. We're going to be traveling to Tuscany. We're going to do a special true crime and wine week. We're going to have a true crime tour guide take us around Florence. And Florence has just tons of history, from the Medici family all the way up to the monster of Florence in the 1980s. We're also going to have a special guide take us through Siena, which has been the site of many, many assassinations over the years. We're going to do a cooking class in Florence, and of course, many wine tastings, wine lunches, wine dinners. It's all going to be fantastic. True crime and wine in Italy. If you want to go, just email us at truecrime@casarowines.com. Truecrime@casarowines.com. That's CASSARO, wines, plural. Simply shoot us an email. We'll forward that on to the tour group that is producing this, and they'll send you some information. No obligation, anything else. They'll just send you some information. And when we get the group filled, which is going to be a very small and private group, I promise you, then we'll book the trip doing true crime and wine in Tuscany.
So there were a couple of trials, John. There was a federal court trial in 1961 where he was tried for the interstate kidnapping of Mildred and Susan. He was convicted and sentenced to life in that case. And then in Maryland State Court, tried for murder of Margaret Harold, convicted and sentenced to life. And then another one in Virginia, and that was tried for the murder of Carol Jackson, convicted and sentenced to death. John, I have a question. Do we see this a lot nowadays? I feel like sometimes when we're talking about interstate murders, serial killers, kidnappings, they do try them for one, possibly two. But we know serial killers that have killed 10, 15, 20. I mean, the resources to try them over and over. Do we still see this, though? Different courts, different states, even though once he's got a conviction and sentenced to life in the first one?
It really depends on the prosecutors. Do the prosecutors really want to close the case officially? Is there a family that's grieving that wants to close the case? It depends on the circumstances. Here, I think you had multiple jurisdictions. And often when we have multiple jurisdictions, each jurisdiction wants his pound of flesh.
That's right.
Right? So
right.
we may not try him for 10 murders in Virginia, but by God, we're going to try him for one and give him the life sentence. And so here, you saw he was arrested on the federal charges. It only makes sense to try him in federal court. But the state of Maryland is saying, we've got homicides here in Maryland. We want to charge him with the homicide, with Margaret Harold's homicide, and we want a conviction here in the state of Maryland. Virginia is saying the same thing. Hey, we had a family of 4 annihilated here in Virginia. That's our Commonwealth. We want to make sure that we try this guy also, and also sentence him to death or what eventually was commuted to life. So I think it's very common when you see multiple jurisdictions, because everybody wants to be able to step forward and say, we got our pound of flesh.
That's right. We did our job. We convicted him, brought him to brought the the family some sort of justice. Okay, so we have some 1985 confessions. So these are confessions made by him. 1956, he confesses to abducting, raping, and murdering Mary Fellers. We mentioned her earlier. That was one of the 4 that was that they thought he was responsible for. White female, 18 years old, and her friend that was with her, Shelby Venable. White female, 16 years old, both from Laurel, Maryland. So both girls have been reported missing. Venable's body is found on June 15th, 1956, in a creek in Virginia, and Feller's body was recovered from the Potomac River the next day. But he's also suspected in multiple other cases that, were happening during this period. Same kind of MO, locations, disappearance, they find the bodies. But he actually confesses to these 2.
Yeah, and I think that really brings everything full circle. When was the first attack that we learned of in 56.
That's right.
Remember, he abducted that girl, but then she didn't press charges. So we know that he started this, not only this criminal spree, but we can say this killing spree in 56.
Yep.
So he's continuing on. And obviously, now that we can start to link, we've got 4 murders here. We've got 2 murders here. We've got an abduction here. Now we've got 2 additional murders. Now we've got 2 other women that, even though we're not charging him, we've linked him with the evidence. Well, you see how that number grew quickly,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
From the 5 known to the 9, and how it could obviously be 10 or more. What other women were not found? Did he, like we said, place some in a river, in a creek, in Chesapeake Bay that will never be found, so we won't be able to tie him to them? Was he evolving? And obviously, I think he was during that time period, in 1956, and murdering in 56, 57, 58, 59, there could be a lot more bodies.
Yeah. Well, and I also think about the fact, it makes sense now. I think about what you just said about 56. He attempts, right? She doesn't press charges. Maybe the 2 girls following was the lack of attempt on the first one, and he's going to make sure he got
away with it.
Got away with it, right? So yeah.
Yeah, got away with it and said, I'm going to try this again.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen to me? I may get away with it again. Well, this time, though, he actually kills the girls. And then maybe that's what sets him down this road to, well, murder's just a part of life. And I'm here to do experiments and see, if my philosophy of life and murder, not life and death, is right. And what makes this so unusual, Brandy, he was intelligent, he was articulate, he was a very talented musician, but that he actually used that death diary to document his crimes philosophically and to let people know, in his mind, murder was just a part of life. Now, as we put a cork in this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind all of our listeners you can follow us on our socials, JJ True Crime and Wine, and get information on the trip to Italy, on the new wine series. The link is in all the bios. So I think that about wraps up business for today. And with that, I want to thank my co-host, Brandy Diamond, for joining me on this journey, and our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for helping to make this show possible. And I invite you to join us for our next episode, where we feature a unique serial killer who kept a secret garden. But instead of planting flowers and vegetables, he hid the bodies of his victims. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us on True Crime and Wine. Salute.